Hi, my name is Łukasz Kąkol, and I'm gonna lead the interactive session about Python 2 end of life, its consequences, various aspects, next steps, tools, and possibly some unexpected subtopics will pop up. So brace yourself, Python 2 is retiring. Before we start, let me introduce myself. First of all, you might notice that this session has a specific title. So, who is watching Game of Thrones? Okay, you may be surprised or disappointed then, but let me put that straight. I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones. I have never seen a single episode. I'm just a fan of memes. Apart from that, I'm working as a senior Python developer at STX Next. It's Python software house located in Poland. I have also gave my talks at EuroPython a few months back and at the last year edition of PyCon UK and PySS. And I'm also sharing my knowledge at local Python meetups in Poznań in Poland. You might notice that this has been marked as interactive session. I will mostly do the talking, but that's not going to be a usual talk. I will lead a moderated discussion with and between all of you. Of course, I would not call anyone out to the board like in the school, so please don't run away. I would just like to encourage you to share your knowledge and opinion on subjects we'll discuss. Please respect others and their opinion. Don't interrupt. Of course, it's fine to disagree with some opinion, but please don't be hostile to each other. If you have a question or want to share your opinion on some subject, please just raise your hand at any time, preferably at the end of the slide. Yeah, this session is scheduled for 1 hour. Talk itself should be about half an hour. We might finish it earlier if I overestimated the load of discussion, or finish it later at the corridor if I underestimated it. Okay, let's check out the agenda. I will first introduce you shortly to the subject, then we will talk about migration to Python 3. And at the end, we might have some more time for additional questions or subtopics you want to bring up. Okay, let's jump to introduction really quick. Let's get started with some historical background. Guido has conceived Python in 1980s. And started implementation in December 1989. Python 0.9 was released in February 1991, and it was the first release of Python. Python is considered relatively young programming language. Fun fact is that this release actually was 2 months before I was born. Python 1 was then released in 1994. Then in October 2000, Python 2.0 has came up to replace Python 1. Most commonly used version 2.7 has been released in July 2010, and latest update took place a few months back in May. Python 2 is going to end of life eventually on January 1st, 2020. Initially, it was about to happen a few years earlier, but this has been postponed. Python 3.0 came up in December 2008, while current version of Python 2 was 2.6.0. Latest Python 3.7 has been released a few months back in June, and next major release of Python 3.8 is planned for October 2019. Okay, Python is going to end of life, so let's talk about migration to Python 3. But before you get started, let me get to know you a little bit better. I know there is a new young generation of programmers, so let me ask that question. Who has ever used Python 2? Okay, looks like all of you. That's what I expected. Who has ever used Python 3? Okay, also looks like all of you. Now harder one. Who has ever worked on migration from Python 2 to Python 3? Okay. I hope you will engage in the discussion and share your knowledge. So let's get to the point then. But first things first, Python 2 is not Python 3. Yeah, that's obvious. There are many incompatibilities which we will talk about later. So what should you do is to remove Python from your system completely. Well, user bin Python is just symlink to Python 2, so it's safe to remove it. When executing your program, your software, you should be fully aware which version of Python you're using and explicitly call it. So yeah, explicit is better than implicit, right? So who's going to execute that command? I have already done that. Okay, one last thing, which no one will probably argue with, but I might be surprised. Start new projects with Python 3. Well, unless we have a very good reason to not to do so, to start it with Python 2, but most of the projects should be started with Python 3. But what about our current projects? Should we migrate? Why should we even think about migration of Python 2 projects to Python 3? First of all, there will be no support for Python 2 past January 1st, 2020, even including security issues. I believe that should be sufficient argument to migrate. If that's not enough, you should get convinced by others. Many huge open source libraries claims to drop support for Python 2. You can find more information at python3statement.org. I will just show you some participating projects. Note that this list is not closed. These projects openly pledge to drop Python 2 support. There are also libraries that are not listed here, but they are dropping support for Python 2 soon anyway. I guess that most commonly used would be pandas, ipython, numpy, Jupyter, scikit, matplotlib. Django is not participating in this project, but Django 1.11 is the last version supporting Python 2, and its support ends in 2020 as well. Here is a timeline for specific project. I don't want to study each specific case, but just want to point out the trend that most of the packages will drop support before 2020. There is one library that will do that a few months after Python 2 support is dropped. So do you recognize any library from this list? I think it might be a bit hard to read them, but maybe someone recognized the library here. Okay. So we got a stick. Let's now bring up a carrot. We all want to use modern language and fancy Python 3 features. But if that did not convince you yet, I will take my last shot. Python 3 is faster than Python 2. Python 3 was generally slower than Python 2, but Python 3.6 was in some cases a bit faster, in some cases a bit slower. But now we have Python 3.7, which on the other hand has noticeable difference, and I can safely say that it's much faster than Python 2. Okay, let's now talk about counter-arguments against migration to Python. First of all, Python 2 is not going to disappear. Nothing is ever deleted from the internet. It will still be downloadable, installable, usable. it's just going to not be maintained anymore. That maintenance thing is only partially true because it was still going to be supported, but unofficially, by PyPy, Cython, and Tauton. Has anyone heard of Tauton? Okay, that's interesting, quite interesting project. It's also known as unofficial Python 2.8. It's a fork of CPython 2.7. It already supports most of new features of Python 3. Maintainers claims to be backward compatible with Python 2 and have a support of brand new features from Python 3. But note that this is not the official project. So what do you think about Tauton? Maybe someone want to share his opinion? Yep.
Is that the project?
I remember seeing a project that was advertised as Python 2.8, and then Guido came on GitHub and said, "Please don't call it Python 2.8." And is that the one that got?
Yeah, that might be that one. It was initially called Python 2.8, but then it was renamed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be that one.
What was it renamed to? Sorry.
Sorry.
What was it renamed to?
Tauton. Initially, it was Python 2.8, but to not make someone could not understand that it's not the official Python and could report a bug on official Python tracker. So to avoid that, they renamed that to Tauton. Okay. Let's go on. There are still some libraries that does not support Python 3. There is a website, py3readiness.org, that checks PyPI projects for the compatibility with Python 3. They say that only 11 packages out of 360 most downloaded packages on PyPI does not support Python 3. Here's the list. It seems that is not a large number, and I bet that most of you doesn't use any of these packages. But in legacy projects, we often have some shady package in our requirements that you can even not know what it's doing. It's just there for ages and it stays here. It may appear that you're using some barely known package forgotten by maintainer, which does not support Python 3. Okay, another factor is in some cases massive effort on migration. Some projects might be easy to migrate, some might take a lot of resources and time to migrate. Anyone want to share his experience on that? How much time took to migrate your project? Yep. Yeah, we have Mike here.
We'll just shout.
Why don't appear on the video if you just shout, though?
Oh, I see. We're in the middle of the process, and we're probably already in tens of millions of dollars of expenditure categories. By the time we've done, you could expect another zero on that.
Oh. Yeah. And how huge is your project? How many files, like lines of code?
Similar number of lines of code.
Oh. Okay. Anyone else want to share an experience? Okay. So let's move on. The last and in most cases deciding argument against migration is that we need to convince either our client or our boss. Well, that might be really tough nut to crack in some cases, but does it has to be the hard way? So the client or boss cares about profit. They cares about the money directly or indirectly. So to persuade your client, you need to show them that they need to invest to gain on it eventually. They will not be interested in migration because Python 3 is better and has fancy new feature and all this nerdy talking, right? They're interested in gain, and most common and known factor is return on investment. We should somehow try to calculate that and present it to them. Another useful thing would be a list of risks both for and against migration. You can use what we have just discussed and pointed out, but be honest with that. Well, you can try a little bias to convince client for the migration, but don't try to hide any risk, any possible risk, because if that risk you covered up will eventually materialize, you might have serious troubles. If all the above fails, I got a magic word for you: security. I assure you that this will work. If you're just tell them that their software will be insecure and vulnerable, and if you don't migrate to Python 3. If your client or boss is not technical person, you can add some buzzwords like hackers, viruses, etc. Well, this might sound cheeky, but security threat is actually real. If new vulnerability will get exploited and Python 2 will not receive even security patches, your software is going to be exposed. So let's now talk about the approach. First option is to convert to Python 3 completely without supporting Python 2 at all. This approach will keep our project frozen for a while. You will be forced to make all changes to the code at once on branch because it will break Python 2 support. In the other words, you will just jump straight from Python 2 to Python 3, and that might be a huge risk. Next one is supporting both Python 2 and Python 3 using the tools I will show you soon. This lets you implement support for Python 3, still keeping support for Python 2. You can do that individually by modules or even by files when you have time. It doesn't freeze your project and can be done in smaller parts. It's definitely safer than the first option, but it might make our code less readable. We may even end up having two branches of code for depending on the version. Yeah, and combination of these two, support both and then drop support for Python 2. This can be the yeah, it's safe and safe than the first option, cleaner than the second option, but it will take more time and the effort. But that's not all options we have. So we can rewrite the application from scratch in Python 3. This can be done either by modules or all the code at once. If your application isn't that big, it might actually be a good idea. But considering that your project has been started with Python 2, I assume that it was a while ago and your app is rather huge. So Hannah had a talk yesterday about legacy code. She was pretty convincing that rewrite isn't really an option. We can also do nothing and keep our application in Python 2. Well, there's nothing that can go wrong here, right? We would just not have benefits of Python 3. We would be left in the dark with unsupported programming language. Well, so actually there is a lot of things that can go wrong, just at a later point. Maybe not even this year, but in 2, 3, 5 years, it might happen. So what's your opinion on these approaches? Maybe let's first take a little votes. Who thinks that the first option would be the best? Okay, not much of you. Second option. Okay, and third one. Yeah, most of you. That's what I'm also thinking, and I'm also tending to option first, but that depends on the size of the project. So, and is there anyone who would vote for option 4 or 5? Yeah. So, which option did you choose, 4 or 5?
Well, it's a bit of a special case, but it's because I'm a developer of PyPy. And so on the one hand, we'll keep supporting Python 2, well, indefinitely is the word we use at the moment. And that's because our toolchain is written in Python 2. And well, it would be a huge effort to port it to Python 3.
Yeah, that's actually true for most of the projects. It's a huge effort for us to migrate any legacy project to Python 3. So there are just few people who voted for option first. Maybe someone want to share his opinion why this is the best option for you. Maybe that's dependent also on the project specific. Anyone? Okay. So let's talk about tools really quick. These are not all available tools, just a must-have subset, and these that I think that are useful for migration. First one is 223. It's in standard library module. It translates Python 2 code to Python 3 using fixers, and either overwrite file, create new one, or just prints the div to the console. You can also define your own fixers, but the set of fixers which is already in place is enough. So that tool is useful using the first approach, so moving completely from Python 2 to Python 3. Another tool is 322. That is not part of the standard library. It's not that stable. It converts Python 2 code to backward compatible Python 3 code. So it can be also run on. It can be run both on Python 2 and Python 3. Another library is Futurize. It translates Python 2 code into code compatible with Python 2 and Python 3. So this is the tool that might be useful for the second approach. So to support both versions of Python. Another library is Modernize. It's kind of extension of 223. It does the same as 223, just have few more fixers. Dunder Future, built in that backports some Python 3 features and allow you to use it in Python 2. Another library is 6 that provides functions that are suitable both for Python 2 and Python 3. That's just a single file for the convenience. You can just copy it into your project. You may expect that if that's a single file, it must be massive, but it's less than 900 lines of code. Another library is Can I Use Python 3? It checks if libraries supports Python 3. You can check your dependencies, third-party library you're using, by running it on your requirements or on specific libraries. It just looks over PyPI classifiers, so it might be the case that it appears inaccurate. That mostly depends on the maintainer. If maintainer of the package add the classifier for Python 3, it will get detected. Otherwise, it will say it's not supported, even if the code is actually supporting Python 3. Another tool is Tox. That's test automation tool. It allows us to test our projects on many different versions of Python. We can check the compatibility with lots of Python versions, but well, this assumes you have tests and really good tests, which does not happen in every project. Coverage is another tool. Well, it checks test coverage. You should use it before migrating your code to ensure that quality of your tests is good before migration. PyLint shows warnings about Python 3 incompatible code. And the last library I want to show you is MyPy. So static type checking. It may appear useful in some cases. For example, it can discover misuse of binary data, etc. So, do you know any tool that I have not listed here, but which may appear useful? Yep.
Where is it? Right.
Front row.
Right, I didn't see you.
Hi there. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a tool inspired by Babel that actually goes through and recompiles even things like async await and various things. So a bit like 3-2, but a bit more well tested, and actually is intending to take Python 3 source code and run it on Python 2 code. Not Red Baron, no. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. That library actually may be very useful, because 3-2 is the only thing I found for getting Python 3 to be run on Python 2, but it's not that stable. So that maintainer, even maintainer claims that it's not that good. Yeah. So the library you mentioned might be great.
I've just been searching for it. I can't find it.
This might be a bit of a stretch, and I'm also biased, but black might be useful, in my experience anyway, because converting consistent Python 2 code is a lot easier than converting inconsistent Python 2 code.
Yeah, black is Python formatter of the code, right? Yep. Yeah, that might be useful to prepare your code for the migration. Yeah.
Another one is quite recently released. It's called Bowler. Basically, it takes the lib2to3 fixes, so it makes it easier to write new fixes. So yeah, if you look at the source code of Futurize or Modernize, it's quite complicated. And similarly for PyLint, writing your own lint rule is quite difficult, but it makes it easier.
So one of the problems, the biggest problem we had when we moved from 2 to 3, we used a few of those. 2 to 3 was very helpful. Once you've addressed the syntax, the thing we kept running into time and time again was things that used to return a string now return bytes, and things that they take a string but they don't take a byte, so you get value errors all over the place. Would any of those tools have told us, without, because nothing has type hints?
MyPy may actually help you if you put the static type checking in your code, and third-party library also supports it, then it will get detected in the first place and tell you that it's wrong. Here in the back.
Oh, sorry.
I use PyCharm, and I'm allowed to select any combination of Python versions, and it'll syntax check all of them. So I'm working on a Python 2 code base at the moment, but it'll underline with a red squiggly line anything that's not valid Python 3. So I can not make syntax errors before we start the move. Yeah, so it's in a better state to start with.
Okay. Anyone else want to share?
This is probably an extension of a lot of these, but having your CI build or process for that running both for your Python 2 build and a Python 3 build. You're expecting your Python 3 build to fail whilst you upgrade, but you can see at least incremental progress whilst you're working towards that, and just having that process in place makes it easier, I guess.
Yeah. Talks might be useful to set up this. It can run your tests both on Python 2.7 and many versions of Python. So you can test it on multiple versions of Python 3.
So static type checking. Someone before me mentioned some libraries don't declare types. There are several tools that can help you generate type stubs for them. So it's easier to detect the cases where now you're returning bytes, but you shouldn't be, and stuff like that. One of these tools, and again, I feel like I'm promoting my own stuff, is Instagram made this tool called Monkey Type. Basically, the idea is it's a wrapper. You run your code in production. It collects type information, generates type stubs for you. So that might be useful.
Okay. Anyone else want to share?
Someone mentioned Babel, and from my experience with Babel and getText, I believe that plain icon V could be quite helpful if you have PO files for your libraries in not necessarily UTF-8. You might suffer from some trouble loading them later because the original load as binary. And then you might straight away have a problem with strings and binary. I'm not sure if someone ran into the problem of needed to convert translation files. Anyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's get back here, maybe.
Sorry, I was extremely unclear when I said Babel. I meant the JavaScript Babel, not the Python Babel, which is slightly different.
Okay. Anyone else know any fancy tool? Okay. So let's get to some tips. That is not a checklist to do before, during, or after migration. It's just few hints that I think might be useful for you. So reliable tests will definitely reduce risk of hidden regression and will make your migration easier. What does that mean, reliable tests? So high test coverage, good test quality, testing edge cases, not having false positives, and anything you could possibly hear and learn about really good tests. Another thing is check dependencies using Can I Use Python 3? If you're using some libraries that does not claim to support Python 3, check if it really does not support that. As I mentioned, this tool just checks PyPI classifiers and depends on maintainer to add it. So check if that really does not support Python 3. For example, on GitHub in source code or in the documentation. If it does not, check if that's not just some leftover, which is no longer in use in your project. I have also encountered a few cases that there were some mysterious libraries and that were not maintained for ages and were not used anymore. If you're still using it, check if you really need to use it. There might be some alternatives that support Python 3. And the last way of handling this case is migrate that third-party library on your own to Python 3, either by contribution or fork. Use tools I just mentioned, but don't trust them at all. Verify all auto-generated code to make sure that there is nothing nasty here. There are some cases that, yeah, tool is just a tool. It might not get it right like we programmers do. Okay. Think about it as a review on the robot, as code review on the robot. If you're going to support both Python 2 and Python 3, use feature detection over version detection. So try to get the feature and fall back to another instead of choosing the feature based on Python version. First example here shows version detection. Yeah, and it checks if there is Python 3 and then import from import lib. But what if Python 4 comes up? It will break if it will still be called import lib. So this is not good enough. Second one is better. It's also based on version detection. It assumes that Python 2 is actually an exceptional, and it makes an exception specifically for Python 2. So, but what if Python 4 will have import lib 2 instead of Python import lib like we expect? This probably won't happen, but you never know. So that's also not good enough. So I encourage you to use feature detection. It's most recommended. So this way we try to get ABC from any library that will have that. So if it won't be in import lib or import lib does not exist, then we fall back to import lib 2. Okay, and last advice from me, check for regression frequently. Really, it may be massive effort, but it's better if you or your team finds a regression bug rather than your end user. Yeah, and that would be all tips from me. Maybe any one of you have some useful tip, maybe some case study that will help someone else to not fall into some issues.
Hi. So I found it's really helpful to have a little module called compat, where you can put all of these kind of compatibility fixes. That way, not only are they separated from the code base and they don't mess things up, there's also one easy place you can see you have all of those, and it acts almost as a checklist, as a place where you can remove them later. That's really handy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else has some interesting case in the front.
So one case that I saw someone have a problem with in regard to feature detection is someone was feature detecting X range in a library, and the report lab library assigns X range to global so that its Python 2 code that uses X range works in Python 3. And so that means that the feature detecting library found X range and started behaving in a Python 2 way after you imported report lab.
Is that library ported to Python 3? Or?
So if you import it in Python 3, it checks for X range. If X range exists, it starts doing Python 2 code.
Yeah, but anyway, if
so
we
depending
migrate,
on the order you import report lab and this other library, you get the Python 2 or Python 3 behavior.
yeah, but I'm pretty sure that 6 will prevent that if you want to support both Python 2 and Python 3.
Oh yeah, they switched to 6 now. It's all 6.
Yeah. So it will prevent that, and in most cases, like when you migrate to Python 3, then you just need to care about range. You should have all occurrences should be of range, not X range, right? So this will kind of not interrupt you or shouldn't cause any issues. Okay. Anyone else have some case study?
I've been working quite large projects. Okay. Yeah, quite a large project from Python 2 to Python 3, supporting both, and well, encountered everything that can go wrong with those. So what wasn't mentioned is that even if your code coverage is good enough, sometimes you don't really know whether all corner cases are covered enough, and Python 3 throws quite a lot of new exceptions in cases where it previously didn't used to do. So like when you're working with dates or base 64 encoding, decoding, and like even if your tests are green and coverage is good, you just don't have tests for those values that throw new exceptions. Yeah, probably that's the biggest one.
Yeah, over here.
Well, for this problem of edge cases, I'd like to mention Hypothesis, the property testing tool, and have some experience of using it for Unicode for detecting the subtle changes to Unicode between Python 2 and Python 3, things to do with surrogates. So if you use Hypothesis, you stand a better chance of detecting these edge cases where Python 2 and Python 3 behave differently.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone want to add something?
I'll say something. I was trying to keep my mouth shut because I'm so noisy. At one of your earlier slides, you looked at the Futurize project.
Yeah, there was a Futurize. Next one. Yeah, it's here.
Yeah, and that seemed to me to be like a really cool idea. And then when I started working with it, or we started working with it, it changes the types of the built-ins in Python 2. So you can end up with a string being actually mapped to Unicode, or str to Unicode when futureize is turned on, and str not mapped to Unicode when it's not turned on. And of course that can cause problems if you have one process that's got it in place and the other one hasn't, and you've got pickle between the two, and it ended up being pretty chaotic, especially then because that worked at the Python level, but then completely and utterly broke everything when you have stuff that's C API stuff. So I suppose if there's any lesson that I can put forward is these magic bullet things, stay away from. Something like you said, something like 2 to 3 or I don't know, one of those tools that'll do some conversion, but not really mess around with your Python, and then get some developers on it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mentioned on the next slide. So use tools, but don't trust them. Verify everything tool is giving you, because it maybe even some malicious code, right? Okay. So is there anyone else who want to share? Okay. So that brings us pretty annoying. Okay, so this brings us to an end. Thank you very much for your attention and for your contribution. You can find slides on the left side using link or QR code. I will also post it on conference Slack on Talks channel. I will also appreciate any feedback about this session, so I can improve myself and give better talks in the future. Link to the feedback form is on the right side. It's just simple, anonymous Google form. I would really appreciate if you spend a few seconds to share your opinion. Thank you very much in advance. You can contact me with an email at the top or using conference Slack. Also feel free to approach me during the conference. Before we finish, just let me invite you to meet up about migration from Python 2 to Python 3. Tomorrow at 10:30 in room C. You can find more details on Slack on general channel. Do you have any questions or additional topics you want to bring up? Okay, that ends.